Imagine being in a situation where every second feels like a lifetime, and the choices you make will either define you as a hero or bury you as a bystander. This story is about a man with a past filled with mistakes, regret, and choices that led him to a place most people would call lost. But in the face of a crisis that would push everyone to their limits, one man chose to be something more. This is the story of an ex-convict, a man who once walked in the shadows of society, but who, on one fateful day, stepped into the light, protecting a policeman, risking his life for a stranger in a hostage situation. Are you ready to uncover what happens when a man's darkest moments collide with his most heroic ones? Stick with me, you'll want to hear this. It all started on a day like any other. But for Alex Miller, a man once imprisoned for a crime he wished he could undo, this day would prove to be the turning point that would shape his legacy. As the world outside buzzed with the usual rhythm, Alex found himself trapped in the middle of something much darker, much more dangerous. This wasn't a life he had ever envisioned for himself. Not as a convict, not as a prisoner, and certainly not as a hero. But fate had other plans. Alex wasn't always a man you would consider a hero. In fact, for most of his life, he was seen as the opposite. Born into a rough neighborhood, surrounded by crime and despair, Alex's path was never easy. His family, barely scraping by, couldn't offer him the guidance he needed. He joined a gang at 16, not because he wanted to hurt others, but because he wanted to belong, to feel safe, to matter. And when the law caught up to him at 21, Alex was sentenced to 5 years in prison for a robbery gone wrong. While incarcerated, Alex reflected on his mistakes and the faces of the people he had hurt. He knew, deep down, that this wasn't the man he wanted to be. But breaking free from that identity, one defined by crime and violence, wasn't easy. Every day, he had to battle his demons. And yet, when he walked out of those prison gates, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a slim hope for redemption, the world didn't welcome him with open arms. There were no heroes waiting at the door, only judgment, only the weight of a past he could never truly escape. But Alex wasn't a man to give up easily. He spent years trying to stay clean, trying to prove that his past didn't have to define his future. He worked as a janitor, a dishwasher, any job he could find to make ends meet. There were no medals, no applause, only quiet victories, sudden sound of sirens in the distance. But little did Alex know, a day would come when his quiet life would be shattered by the roar of sirens, and his past would collide with his future in a way he could never have predicted. It was supposed to be a regular afternoon, but for the people at the Bank of Somerville, everything changed in an instant. A man, desperate and armed, walked into the bank demanding money. The hostages were lined up, fear in their eyes, as the tension in the room escalated. And then, in a turn of fate, Alex, who happened to be in the area after finishing his shift at a nearby diner, was caught in the chaos. The bank was only a block away from his job. He could have walked away. He could have pretended he didn't hear the screams. After all, he was no hero, right? He was a man with nothing to lose. But something inside him wouldn't let him walk away. The man he had fought so hard to become, the man who wanted to be better, wasn't going to let this moment slip away. It was then that he saw something that froze him in place. A policeman, trapped in the line of fire. The officer, desperate, had tried to move forward to negotiate, but the criminal had him pinned. Alex wasn't thinking about his past. He wasn't thinking about the mistakes he had made. All he could think of was one thing. That cop didn't deserve to die. In that moment, Alex made a choice that would haunt him and define him forever. He bolted toward the officer, not caring about the danger, not thinking about the odds. He grabbed the cop, pulling him behind cover just as the gunfire erupted. What followed was a blur of chaos. Gunshots echoed, hostages screamed, and the police were racing to respond. But in the midst of it all, Alex's instincts took over. He shielded the officer, crouching low as bullets ricocheted off the walls around them. Every second felt like an eternity, but Alex never wavered. He didn't want to be a hero, but in that moment, he knew he had no choice. He couldn't let someone else pay for his past mistakes. But there was one problem. The standoff wasn't going to end with one man's sacrifice. Alex and the officer were pinned down, and the only way out was for someone to make a move that would cost someone their life. The tension rises. Alex's internal struggle is visible as he looks at the officer, both unsure of how this will end. Would Alex sacrifice himself for a man who might never see him as anything more than a criminal? Or would his moment of redemption become just another dark chapter in his story? Just as it seemed all hope was lost, the police were able to breach the building. Alex, with the officer in tow, made a break for it, but the criminal had one final card to play. He fired one last shot. In that split second, Alex made a decision that no one would have ever expected. He threw himself in front of the officer, taking the bullet meant for the man who had been trying to save the hostages. Alex survived, but not without consequences. The wound was severe, and recovery was long. But something changed in the world's perception of him. The ex-convict, who had once been dismissed as a lost cause, was now seen in a different light. The officer he had saved, along with the hostages, spoke out in Alex's defense. They called him a hero. They called him a man who had redeemed himself. Sometimes it takes one moment, one decision, to change everything. For Alex Miller, that moment wasn't about undoing the past. It was about choosing who he wanted to be, despite it. He didn't just save a life that day, he saved himself. So what do you think? Can a person truly change, or is their past too heavy to escape? Could you, in the heat of a crisis, find the courage to be someone better? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more moments that could change the way you see the world.